So I've decided to do a series of videos on my book, Dead Celebrities, Living Icons, because it's come to my attention. I received a royalty statement in the mail that says that it only sold 110 copies, which is staggering given the nature of what I thought would be the popular nature of the subject matter. Um, so I think that a series of YouTube videos might help to clarify the book's intellectual content and what I think is its validity as a work of intellect. Um, I think, and I'm guessing at this, but I think the perception may be that the subject and topic of fame is self-evident and requires no intellectualization. It doesn't require any discourse. It's just a self-evident phenomenon. But as most people know who know the history of philosophy, philosophers philosophize because they immediately pick up phenomena that are evident to everyone, and so evident that they have disappeared into banality. Like, for example, the way Heidegger addresses being. Every time we say when something is, it's self-evident. So this is what he focuses on, and he built a whole philosophy out of examining the word is. It's that which is most self-evident in our environment that disappears into invisibility and becomes utterly banal by the very fact of its ubiquity. And because we become accustomed to our environment and used to it, we simply pass through it. But as McLuhan says, it's the fish that cannot see the water that it's in because the water has become its total environment. If it were to be able to come outside the water and turn around and look back at its environment, it might think it was rather fascinating, actually. Oh, I live there in that environment, and it might begin to study the whole ecology, and it could become a revelation to it. So I'm fascinated with studying environments that most people think are beneath mention, beneath notice, just because of their ubiquity. And my first major book on movies was directed to that, for that very same reason. And the new book that I just did on the new media invasion was another attempt to bring a certain amount of intellectual illumination to an environment that is ubiquitous and self-evident and obvious and in no need of discourse. And that's why it appeals to me, precisely because I think I like subjects that everyone assumes are simply not in need of, that they're too obvious to require discourse about them. So that's why they appeal to me as a challenge. The celebrity, and the other thing too is that the books that I've written are books that I wrote to fill a niche, a gap, because in every case I went looking for a book about that subject and couldn't find anything. Thus, back when I wrote the book Celluloid Heroes and Mechanical Dragons, I was looking for a good book that related philosophy to the types of movies that I grew up on, Star Wars and the films of David Cronenberg and Werner Herzog, and could illuminate those aspects of the technological fascinations of those directors in those films, and I couldn't find anything, at least not anything worth reading. So I decided to write that book to fill that niche. And the same thing then with the celebrity book, and this is it here, Dead Celebrities, Living Icons. It goes for about 40 bucks, and you can get it on Amazon if you go on there and order for it. It seems a little on the expensive side, but at least it's hardcover. The new book, The New Media Invasion, is about the same price, and it's softcover, so this is a better deal, it being hardcover. But I wrote it because what I did was I was involved in another project, and I was going to write a sort of sequel to the movie book by writing a book about heroes and the phenomenon of contemporary heroes in literature, in novels like Dashiell Hammett's The Maltese Falcon. I was going to examine the archetype of the sort of the James Bond character. I had essays on James Bond and essays on the character of the private detective in The Maltese Falcon. And so I was going to look at all these different types of heroes that have configured popular culture since the beginning of the 20th century. I was going to start with Tarzan, I think. And then at some point it occurred to me, well, Elvis Presley should be worked in there. He represents a certain type of great American hero, a mass phenomenon, and maybe I'll take a look at him for the book. So then I proceeded to read a 2-volume biography on Elvis Presley, and who I had no interest in whatsoever, never listened to any of his music, didn't care about it, and I had no interest whatsoever. I was just curious, so I picked up the book and read it, and it read like a novel. It was absolutely captivating, and I realized that this is a phenomenon here that really has not been examined. And then after finishing the book, I wrote the chapter, and it went very smoothly, And so then at that point I started looking around to see who else had written intellectual books about the archetype of the celebrity. And to my dismay, I found absolutely nothing. No one had written anything. And so I realized that the subject needed to be addressed. The only thing I found was Daniel Borstein's discussion in his book, The Image, which is a very good book, by the way. If you haven't read it, it's an excellent media studies classic, in which he has a chapter in there in which he talks about the celebrity. And he makes an important distinction in there. He says that the celebrity, in contradistinction to the hero, is a new phenomenon that took place in the middle of the 19th century as the result of what he calls the graphic revolution, in which there was an explosion of new media such as the Associated Press and the wireless, and you got new kinds of books being put out, dime novels and so forth. All this new media with these new kinds of newspapers and so forth, all this happened in the middle of the 19th century, and he calls this the graphic revolution, and he says that the press agents created the celebrity during that period because they constantly had to keep their clients in the news. So it was their job to constantly go to newspapers, phone them, and contact them and keep their celebrities visible in the media. So that began to create the whole archetype of the celebrity, in which he says greatness is divorced from fame. So greatness becomes no longer an issue. Fame is simply famous for being famous at this point. And prior to that, the hero had been that figure who became famous slowly over great deeds and achievements, the Alexander the Great, the Julius Caesar, the Abraham Lincoln, the Robert E. Lee, the character who became famous over time, and usually reluctantly so, as the result of a series of great deeds. And that was, in that case, the hero's fame was identical with greatness. And so with the celebrity now, the media-generated celebrity in the middle of the 19th century, we get this archetype of individuals being famous for being famous, with very little talent, or not necessarily having any talent. But he says that one of the crucial distinctions then between the celebrity and the hero is that with the passage of time, the hero becomes ever more and more famous, basically becoming a permanent acquisition of civilization, whereas the celebrity tends to disappear with time. So that if you ask your parents who the celebrities were, who was famous in their lifetime, you're going to get a lot of obscure names. And this is a common phenomenon. I can mention the celebrities who were famous. I'm 43, and back when I was growing up as a teenager, some of the people who were famous, Debbie Gibson, Tiffany, Terence Trent D'Arby, Max Headroom, most people don't even know who those people are anymore. And so it does happen to be the case that Borstein has identified a type in which the celebrity becomes less famous over time and tends to disappear. It tends to be a generational phenomenon that's tied in with the rapidity of the metabolism of the media. But now I began to wonder about something. What I think Borstein missed was another type of celebrity, and it's the type of celebrity who does not become less famous with time, but rather more famous with time, sort of similar to the hero. When we think of names like Marilyn Monroe, James Dean, Elvis Presley, John F. Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, these are people who have become more and more and more famous with the passing of time. So they constitute a different species of celebrity than the type that Borstein was talking about. So I agree with Borstein's essay, but I don't think it goes far enough. And I think that this type of celebrity escaped him. So I wrote this book to address the archetypology, the phenomenology of this type of celebrity. Why is it that Marilyn Monroe and Elvis Presley and James Dean have become these sort of platonic forms of the media landscape? They're undying. You see their images everywhere you go. You walk into poster shops, and the poster shops are filled with images of James Dean in his trench coat. And kids on college campuses still buy these posters and hang them up on their walls. They're absolutely undying icons. These images won't go away. Marilyn Monroe with the dress blowing up, and James Dean with that red jacket, or with the famous black and white photographs of him with his trench coat, his navy blue trench coat, walking along the streets of New York. Those are just absolutely archetypal images, and they're still popular with kids to this day. And so there's a phenomenon there, and it needs to be addressed, and I couldn't find anything that addressed it, so that's why I wrote the book. So that's point number one, and I address all of this in the book's introduction, which I titled Saints in the Age of Electronic Stained Glass, and I've borrowed the phrase electronic stained glass from the great culture historian William Irwin Thompson. We are living in the age of electronic stained glass. Everywhere you look, we have these video monitors, and they constitute a kind of self-luminous electronic stained glass in which we have the phenomenon. And this is based on a distinction that McLuhan made between light through and light on. Light through was the phenomenon of media in the Middle Ages, where the Gothic cathedrals had great stained glass walls and windows in which light came through and created an otherworldly radiance inside those cathedrals. They were meant to be exemplifications of the New Jerusalem, and the light in its multicolored nature was meant to evoke rubies and emeralds and jewels and rare and precious gems, which were thought to compose the structure of the New Jerusalem. But also in the illuminated manuscripts of the time, the images look similar to stained glass images. So there's always light coming from another world, the Christian heavenly world, coming through the culture. Then McLuhan says that with the rise of the printing press and the Gutenbergian revolution, we began to shift into light on, in which the printed page now requires an exterior source to illuminate it. And so the eye tracking linear lines of type began to create and configure a kind of linear consciousness embedded in real three-dimensional space. Depth perspective and painting comes in at this time, in which everything is illuminated from without, either by the sun or later by the 19th century with electric light. Everything is illuminated externally in the whole Gutenbergian epoch. But now it seems to me, as it seemed to McLuhan and also to Thompson, that we've returned back to a kind of age in which light through self-luminous phenomena have returned. And I borrowed in the new book that I just wrote, The New Media Invasion, I borrowed a term from Hindu metaphysics known as sukshma. Sukshma is what the Hindus call subtle matter. And subtle matter is self-luminous. The forms of our dreams are self-luminous. The figures of myth are self-luminous. They radiate their own interior light, like those bioluminescent fish at the bottom of the ocean that glow with their own weird radiance. The sun is self-luminous also, and fire is self-luminous. And sukshma, subtle matter, is to be distinguished. The Hindus distinguish it from stula, which is physical matter, concrete or gross matter, which is illuminated exteriorly from another light source. And they say that the phenomena of waking consciousness is directed toward an outer world of things spread out in space and illuminated externally. That's stula, physical forms, whereas the forms that are experienced in dream and in the inward turning of yoga are these self-luminous images that rise up out of the depths of our psyche, and they pulse, and they change form on their own. They have their own weird internal radiance. Those are the forms of sukshma. And I think with all of our sort of stained glass technology that surrounds us now, have returned to this sukshma technology. All our technologies now are self-luminous. Especially, you see them everywhere you go. You're sitting in a movie auditorium and somebody's got a handheld gadget in front of you which is radiating this little miniature stained glass image in your peripheral vision, so that it's competing with the movie screen so that you can't see the movie screen in peace. And wherever you go, these little self-luminous screens are just popping up like images in a Paul Klee painting everywhere you go. So we're surrounded by these gadgets. They've become our new environment. Now, what I want to do with the celebrity book, or what I did with the celebrity book, was to examine the descent of the contemporary human being into the plasma pool, as it were, the electronic plasma pool configured by this new environment, this new electronic environment of self-luminosity and the acceleration of images to the speed of light. This technology all takes place at the speed of light. And the experiment that's in the mythology there, you'll note, is similar to the Gnostic myth of the descent of the Anthropos. The Anthropos is the primal man who exists in heaven, who looks down at the world of matter, nature, and he sees his own image reflected at him in the pool of nature, phusis, and the Anthropos falls into it, and in falling he becomes caught and captured in it, and he incarnates in a physical body, and he remains trapped in the world of matter, but the memory of the realm of light up above forever attracts him to try to get back to it, which is the basic myth of Gnosticism. It's also the myth of the celebrity. The celebrity is analogous directly to the Anthropos, who descends into the electronic plasma pool, which is the new total environment that surrounds us completely. And he was the first, he or she was the first to descend into this environment, accelerate themselves to light speed, and replicate copies of themselves. Electronic technology produces human copies at light speed. It replicates very, very fast. It multiplies the ego, and it's dizzying and disorienting, and it inevitably has a negative psychological effect on these individuals who achieve this kind of fame. So that's the basic mythic surround that I wanted to examine here, the basic phenomenology.